Hey everyone, and welcome to the show this week. Let's move right along and introduce my guest this week. His name is Mark McKeon. Now, Mark is one of Australia's leading work-life balance and team cohesion advocates. He was high-performance coach for the Collingwood AFL team and acted as Collingwood's club runner for the AFL for more than 250 games, and he also played VFL football for Melbourne. He's also the creator of the innovative Go Zone and Everyday Counts programs and speaks about achieving work-life balance, getting in the Go Zone, team building and leadership. Now, in this episode, we talk a lot about the parallels between being high-performing and the real link between performing at a high level on the footy pitch versus performing as a facilitator in a workshop. Now, what's great about Mark is that this conversation is extremely practical, but also inspiring. So he'll get down to detail and tell you how you should set up your rooms and what you need to say to the audio-visual guy. If you need some motivation and a bit of a G-up, you'll get a lot of that from this episode. All right, welcome to the podcast, Mark McKeon.
Hello, Leanne.
Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for your time. Mark, to start, I'd really love you to share with our listeners your career journey. It's a bit different from any other facilitator that we've had on the show. You started out playing in a high-performing footy team and then transitioned to a high-performing coach, and now you work with businesses as well. So you've kind of pivoted your skills through sport and business. Can you share with our listeners a bit about your career journey and how you wound up in the world of speaking and facilitating?
It's certainly not a standard journey. It was really Serendipity 101 because, as you mentioned, I was involved with footy as a player, and then as a high-performance coach, my original training was in biomechanics and human movement. And while I was doing the high-performance coaching, because in those days it wasn't a full-time role, I also set up corporate gyms for clients. And one of the clients actually asked me to do a talk to the staff to try to get more people to join the company. So I did that, and I had a call a couple of days later from an agent, a Speakers Bureau rep, asking me to, when I was doing another talk, could I let him know because he wanted to come and watch. And I said, well, I'm not doing it anymore. That was the only one. It was a one-off. But he actually then organised a job, a freebie. He came along, I guess liked what he saw and asked if I'd, want him to represent me. So it was purely by accident.
Wow.
And then slowly over the next 5 years, that took over from my corporate work. And then another 10 years later from my coaching work. And for the last, 20 years, it's been an absolute full-time role.
Congratulations. So that first speech, can you remember, that was over, say, 20 years ago. What kind of preparation had you had before that? Had you had any kind of media training through your footy career, or was this just something that you learnt on your own?
Look, no, to be honest, I think it's maybe just a skill that I managed to have, and it was obviously very raw at the time, and I'm hopefully improved it since then. but I just tried to do it in as honest and as natural a way as I could, and I still try to do that now. Maybe I think it's like 1,400 presentations later. I still try to bring that same honesty to my presentations when I can.
Wow. So let's talk about those parallels between, high performance. I used to play netball, not at a level that you did, but at a pretty high level. And I've often said in the podcast, the way that I prepare for a big workshop or a speech is kind of the same way that I'd prepare for a netball game in terms of my morning routine, the music I listen to when I'm on the drive in. Do you find that there are some parallels between playing in a high-performing game like a footy final as opposed to presenting in front of thousands of people?
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the things that really drew me towards it, because after I'd played for a little while but then coached for a lot longer, you do everything you can and you do your role to your highest level, but come game day, the players would run out and I'd watch from the sidelines. And, whether that's an ego thing or a desire to have the most influence you can, I really was drawn to the fact that if you're on stage or if you're facilitating, it was you, it was your performance, it was your ability to affect the outcome. So I think that's a really strong parallel from a broader point of view of sort of the AFL environment and a corporate environment. I think it's also it's amazing how much impact leaders have, coaches or business leaders have, in getting that discretionary effort and getting that high level of performance out of their teams. There's amazingly close parallels there.
So let's talk about that discretionary effort. What does that look like for you in terms of your preparation for a big, say for a big workshop? So you've got a new client. They want something. Let's talk about your Go Zone training in a bit later, but you're approaching a new client. You haven't worked in that industry before. What kind of effort do you put into to making that a really great experience for the people that show up?
Yeah, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's just one thing you can't skimp on, regardless of whether you've been travelling or you've been busy with other roles. You have to do that. You have to do that research. And so, and I always would want to have that absolutely done at least the day before the event, if not well before that. But certainly that starts with your web search, your checking out their website and getting a close understanding of what the industry does, what their product or service is, if you haven't had previous experience with that company or with that industry. And then most importantly, when you're getting the brief from the clients, often the clients don't really know what it is they want, or you might be working with a committee and there are differing views on what should or what shouldn't happen. And one of the great dangers, especially in a facilitation role, is it becomes vague and you don't have a clear idea of what you're trying to achieve. So when I do that brief, I'm always starting with the end in mind, and I often ask the people, if you had a magic wand and this day or these days could go as well as they possibly could, what would be the 3 outcomes? And for them, that can be a really challenging question that they need to go away and think about and discuss. But once you know, as the facilitator, what those key outcomes are, then you can work back and do your preparation about your discussion groups or what content you might provide yourself, and you can structure your day. But I absolutely, I'm quite a casual person, but that's one thing that I'm not casual about. I can be quite painful about that. And the only other thing is room setup. I'm very pedantic about room setup to make sure that you've got the best opportunity for people to be involved.
Oh, great. So in terms of room setup, what does that look like for you?
Every room's different, but I would certainly, and it depends on the size of the group and so on. So the worst rooms are long, skinny rooms, like corridor-type rooms where you're at one end and there can be a long distance between you and the last person. That makes it much, much harder. So a room that was like that, I would try to have that configured so that I was in the middle, so people were only at the side in the middle, so people are only half as far away from you as they would be if you have it the other way. If it's more of a presentation thing and it is a larger audience, you have to have a stage. Often organisers won't provide a stage, but you have to have a stage. I'm about 183 centimetres, so I'm reasonably tall. But if people are sitting down and they might be 10, 15 metres away from you, it's very hard for them to see you. I also would never have a lectern, because the lectern is a barrier between you and the audience, and you need to be open and in control. So I'd absolutely get rid of that. And in terms of seating with a smaller group, where it's maybe a facilitation where there's 30, 40 people, I think round tables open at the front so people aren't sitting with their back to you are much more preferable, rather than a U-shape. A U-shape, depending on the number of people in the room, can work, but it tends to be very formal and very back to school, because people are sitting next to each other almost like they're back at school. And if it's a larger audience but in a bigger auditorium that might hold a few hundred or even more people, to block off the back and have the people more towards the front so they're closer to you.
Oh, yeah. You always find in those big sort of room setups, when you invite people to come in, they always linger towards the back, and it's a bit of effort to kind of rally them up the front. That's really, really great practical advice. In
regard to that too, for people who haven't facilitated so many times before, if you're ever in doubt as to whether you should or shouldn't use a microphone, always, in my opinion, use it, because you might have a strong voice, but you could be speaking all day, and the extra amplification that you get through a mic makes your voice much deeper, much more resonant, and it just really adds to the quality. So sometimes people say, why did you use a mic? There wasn't that many people there, because it's one of those subtle things that helps. My preference is for a lapel mic because it means both hands are free, and when you have a handheld mic, unless you have it in the right spot, it's very easy to get that popping P all the time. And if it's a directional mic, one other thing that sometimes people may not be aware of, if you sort of hold the mic, a handheld mic, vertically, just sort of in front of your chin, you don't get nearly as good a sound as if you hold it at an angle so the top of the microphone is directly in front of your mouth. But of course, when you do that, you're actually partially hiding your face. So whichever way you go with a handheld mic, you lose a little bit. So my preference is the lapel mic. And, of course, I wouldn't use a lectern mic because to use a lectern mic, you need to stand behind the lectern. And as I mentioned, that creates a bit of a block between you and the audience. But, just to add to that all these things are opinions and people have their own preference.
That's true, but I agree with you on all of those, especially the having a lectern up there. I think there's nothing worse. It sort of creates a block. I guess people use it because it's a bit of a safety net for them because they can have their notes there and everything else. But I do challenge all of our listeners to, if given the option, go the lapel. It's definitely more free. Just remember to have it switched off when you're off stage.
Yeah.
I've heard it.
And also, sorry to interrupt there, Leanne, and also be pedantic about the battery. If there's an AV tech there, they'll often say, I had a new battery yesterday, but I would actually respectfully ask for a new battery before your session, because I've been on stage in front of quite a few hundred people when the battery's gone, just fails, and you're mute, and it's embarrassing for someone to have to run up on stage and fiddle around with the battery pack while you're trying to do your presentation.
Oh no! So is that one of the worst things that happened to you on stage, or have you had any other experiences that you can share?
Things are going to happen. That's certainly happened a couple of times. There's been malfunctions in the warning system, so you'll get alarms as if there's been a fire or so. Once at a presentation at the MCG, they were testing the siren, so they rang the siren every 15 seconds for about 10 minutes, and there's been malfunctions of equipment where stages have collapsed, not in a dangerous way where anyone's got hurt or anything like that, but things are going to happen, and that's when it does, the audience will take their lead from you, and if you show that it's not really worrying you, or you're pretending that it's not really worrying you, they'll come along for the ride. So expect the unexpected.
Oh, that's really good advice, to expect the unexpected. I think that's key for all facilitators, to be extremely flexible, which is difficult if you want to sort of control where it's going and those outcomes that you spoke about, your top three, and waving that magic wand. I think that's a really great question. What other, in terms of your delivery style, what do you think that you bring to a show or to an event? What does Mark bring?
Well, hopefully some knowledge and some expertise and some enthusiasm. When I was thinking about the chat we were going to have, and this is my number one tip, if you like, and it's something that even quite a few people in the industry with a lot of experience, to be honest, I think don't do, and it's what I call being audience-centric. And what I mean by that is, if you're out the front, whether it's a keynote presentation or a facilitation, you've been given the privilege because either you know something that the audience don't know, or you're trying to get the audience to do something that they may not be doing. You're in a really important centre of influence there. And a lot of people, when they're in that situation, they're thinking of themselves. What will I say? How will I go? I hope I don't run out of time. I hope they can see my slides. I hope I get an 8 out of 10. And they're thinking about themselves. And even to the point where sometimes when I actually help teach presentation skills, when people are doing a practice, I'll put a plant in the audience who will actually get out their phone and pretend to send a text message, or even lift up a newspaper, a full tabloid newspaper, and hide their head behind the newspaper in the front row. And after the person has done this practice presentation, you'll say to them, who do you think wasn't quite engaged? And they won't, and very often they won't know.
Because they weren't paying attention, they were more absorbed in,
Exactly. So by audience-centric, what I mean by that is you're a servant for the audience. So the more you think about the audience, how can I help the audience in your preparation phase, and then in the actual presentation or facilitation phase, it makes you look at the audience. It makes you aware if a particular person maybe isn't quite engaged, or if you've really hit a note that you need to keep going on, whether it's time to pause and ask questions. The cues are always there from the audience, and I think it's the most important thing. And in addition to that, audiences love it. They love it. They can sense it. They can smell it when you've got their best interests at heart, and I think it enriches the experience for everyone. And if as a presenter you get a bit nervous or unsure, it tends to take away all that anxiety, because your focus is away from yourself and towards the audience. I often say to people, some people present with here's your solution, now what was your problem again mentality. But as a facilitator, you need to have the opposite. You need to dig and find and listen and watch, and that, I think that's the magic. I really do think that's the magic.
That is the magic. And I love audience-centric approach, and what you're explaining in terms of your presentation skills training. I think that's everyone's kind of worst fear, is that they're up there talking and someone will pull out a phone, but it's very real. And I think instead of seeing it as this something to be fearful about, it's really a sign to you to say, instead of continuing what you're doing, why don't you break it up? Why don't you ask a question and use this as a cue to make the workshop a better impact? So I think that's a really great practical tool for all of our learners. Don't take it as a personal hit to what you're doing. Take it as a sign to switch things around.
Yeah, and what happens from that is, if you're using a slide deck and where that session has gone means that the next couple of slides are no longer valid or not at that time, then I don't think there's anything wrong with acknowledging that, because of the way the session's gone, going to slide sort of mode, fast forwarding through to where you want to go and just bring up the next slide. You don't have to be a prisoner to the structure that you've set. A lot of people are worried about running out of content, so they'll prepare 4 hours worth for an hour presentation. But I find it's always different. Certainly in a facilitation, a keynote's a little bit different, but a facilitation is always different. And I'm forever swapping slides around and stopping and accelerating and changing the times of the breaks and so on, all really hopefully to the benefit of the audience rather than my own comfort level.
So you talked about people do have this fear of running out of content before the time's allocated is over. What do you do in that situation if you have run out of time? Or do you sort of throughout the day recognise that, we've gone quickly here, so we have more time for a discussion here? Do you kind of pace it a bit more, or do you kind of wait till the end and go, okay, well, here are some other things I've thought about, let's do this now? How do you approach it?
Yeah, it's a good question. To be honest, look, I've been doing this a long time now, so I have a lot of blocks of different information, and I think maybe one of the indicators that you maybe have reached a certain level of competence or beyond is that you've always got more than you have time for. But so that's one thing. So I guess you'd say fundamentally. The second thing is I will always have more ready in the preparation phase than I think I'm going to need. And sometimes those later ones that I wasn't going to get to because of the way the session goes, maybe will come forward and something else we won't get to. But I'm always going back to that, thinking with the end in mind. What's going to be the best thing to actually get to those outcomes we want? And I guess that's the other maybe a really important thing that's a little bit different to sport, to be honest, because when you were playing netball, or if any of your listeners are playing sport, I found I always performed better when I was just in the moment. I wasn't really thinking about it too much. I wasn't sort of conscious of how many kicks I'd had. I was just doing it. But as a facilitator, you almost need another part of your brain, because while you might even be speaking, listening, to be part of a discussion, part of your brain's got to be thinking, where do I go next? What did that person mean? What's the context? How do I move towards that outcome? So you almost need to split your brain to the one that's actively there, to the one that's thinking about where do I go next. That's something that probably does come from experience, but when people come to me and say they want to be a facilitator, I actually focus on that audience centricity I mentioned about the split brain, and then I tell them go away and do it 100 times and come back, because that's sort of what it takes, I think.
It does.
But it's a worthwhile journey.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really difficult to stay in the moment and stay completely present, which we know is really important. And then also think, where is this moving to? What do I need to do next? So you do need to split your brain. I've never heard of it being, compartmentalised that. I kind of think by doing this podcast as well, when I first started, I think this is episode 25. When I first started, I was keeping to script a lot. But I think through the journey I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm thinking, where is this conversation leading to, and kind of directing it that way. So I think sort of live questions and interviewing is very similar to the whole split brain in terms of facilitation too.
Really... I agree. I absolutely agree. And there's a lot of synergy there. And sometimes when you're being interviewed from someone and the discussion is headed in a certain direction, and you can tell you that they're just asking you the next question that's on their run sheet that's no longer maybe as relevant or as congruent. So, a good thing for facilitators to do is to listen to skilled interviewers. You're doing a great job. I think the morning DJs who interview a lot of people get really skilled at through and really getting to the core of whatever the issue is really quickly, because they only have a certain short amount of time to interview someone, and they may not get so much time for preparation. I find they're terrific, and sometimes when I'm listening to them, I'm thinking to myself, what question would I ask next? And then they ask a better one than the one I had in mind, and I think that's so you've always got to try to keep learning if you can.
Yeah, that's right. I think my favourite, I've got two favourites. Richard Feidler from ABC Conversations is one of mine, and Andrew Denton is a bit of a legend in Australian journalism. He really gets to the core, gets a lot of emotion right there, but in a longer space of time. So, Mark, I guess being present and having to forecast ahead and standing up all day, it can be pretty exhausting. You do this full time. How do you manage your energy levels through the day and through the week, and make sure that you're set to go and full of energy every time that you're out on stage?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it can be extremely draining. You might have heard the saying, it's a hard way to make an easy living. And I think anyone who's been on stage for 6 to 8 hours in a day can certainly attest to how mentally draining it is. So on the day, I do get there early to make sure the room setup's right, the sound's right, and so on, and everything's ready to go. But then I disappear until about 5 minutes before the session's going to start. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to people, but as soon as people know you're the facilitator, you're the speaker, and they see you, they want to engage, they want to start. And it's almost like your work has started a little early. During the breaks, I disappear during breaks. Sometimes I think people may take the wrong inference from that. I'm not trying to be arrogant at all. I'm just trying to freshen myself up for the next session. So even to the point sometimes where I'll say, look, sorry, but I have a quick phone call I need to make just to get away and get that space. If at all possible, I try to get some fresh air. Have one coffee during the morning break and then just really chill out. I'll even to the point where at lunchtime, if I can, if there's a green room or something like that, I will actually lie down and just breathe. I'll do a bit of meditation, that sort of stuff, and just give myself as much space and as much rest as I can. And then at the end of the day, I will always stay back and talk to people and answer any questions they may have. So I absolutely try to be quite selfish during the day. I never drink alcohol the night before I'm going to present. Usually I will fly in the night before rather than the morning. There's a few reasons for that, because you never know if you're going to get a flight delay, but then you can get a good night's sleep, be up, ready to go. Usually do a little bit of exercise on the morning of a presentation to be ready. And I also I'm mentally prepared to. I've done all of the actual preparation the day or the days before, but the actual morning of the event, I don't say it out loud, but I do say to myself how great this is going to be, how much fun it's going to be, how it's a privilege for you to be there, and you're really going to help people, and really do pump myself up on the morning of a session.
Oh, that's really great to hear that tip, especially about being selfish. I think because you want to be of service to people and help everyone, but I think you do have to protect yourself. And I really like your excuse of just going to make a phone call, because I kind of want to get away, but I don't think people pick up on that cue sometimes. So I'm gonna use that one, and I think some of our listeners will too. So thanks. Now, I was wondering if you could explain. I really found that your concept of the go zone that I saw on your website, I found that really interesting, and I think it would be useful for you to explain that to our listeners and what that go zone is really about.
Yeah, sure. It's really, I guess you'd say it's my signature program. It's one of those things that's been like 20 years in the making, and it's really an evolution of all of the work I've done in the past, because my passion is for what I call sustainable peak performance, that people in corporate life achieving to a high level, but being able to maintain that level for 5, 10, 20 years, as opposed to someone who can, reach a level of sales goals or be a good, effective leader or manager, but they just can't sort of maintain that pace. It's also part of the issue is when I was a young footy player, the training that we actually went through was quite barbaric. I think I spent 5 years just being tired every day.
Wow.
And just sort of enduring my career rather than really enjoying it. So all those things really set up a passion for me about this whole sustainable peak performance. So the Go Zone is a structure and a system where you shift between gears or zones, as I call them, between a go zone, a slow zone, and a no zone. So go zones for corporate people are usually 2 hours. They're periods, if they're at their desk, where they're having the door shut, they've switched off the email arrival sounds, and they just power through tasks. A task is anything that's up to an hour. Anything beyond an hour is a project, and you break it down into smaller tasks. You have a task list. You have everything you need, and the task could be a phone call. It could be an email. It could be working on a spreadsheet. It could be writing a report. It could be doing a one-on-one. But when you're in this go zone, they're the most important tasks for your business that day. And there's no excuses, there's no distractions. You actually have a buzzer that tells you when the go zone is up, and you just power through them. And you're not trying to do 5 or 10, you're just trying to do one at a time to the best of your ability till the time is complete. And there's a lot of blood chemistry that sits under that, the way adrenaline and cortisol work in your body and the neurotransmitters of serotonin and melatonin to balance them out, because you can't be in this go zone state all day, every day. So for most people, it's a couple of hours. Go zone is a longer zone where you're still working, it's still productive, but you do a bit of this, you do a bit of that, you maybe make a call, go out, grab a coffee, check the paper, listen to another conversation. You're just going from one task to another, which is fine as long as it's not your only level of performance, because a lot of people are in this slow zone all day, every day.
Yes.
And it's like a groove, but they can't get out of it.
Yeah.
And then the third zone is the recovery zone. That's what I call the no zone. So this is away from work times, when you're not at work, but crucially you're not thinking about work, where you're investing in a passion, a hobby, a pastime. You take it easy on yourself, your phone's off, you're just doing something you really enjoy, and you're trying to do this go zone to no zone on a 2-to-1 ratio. So in the course of a week, if you did 8 hours in the go zone, you do 4 hours in the no zone, not necessarily same day, just space that over the week, so that you have some structure of changing levels of intensity upwards and downwards, and everything else is either the sleep or the slow zone. And a lot of people use that to really create some rigor and structure around their performance, and to get a little bit of mental toughness into their daily routine.
Yeah, what a great concept. Because I know that all the rage now is kind of high intensity interval training, which is the difference between doing something at a really fast rate and then recovering as well. And I think what you're doing here is just aligning that to the workplace. And I think when you were talking about the slow zone, I was thinking, yeah, that's exactly what I'm sitting in most of the time. So I'd love to share this with my colleagues and just go, look, can we make a commitment to looking at creating a ratio like this and respecting each other's time and getting into the go zone, 2 hours every day. I think that would be really, you churn out so much work, you could kind of not coast, but I can imagine those 2 hours are high impact.
It's important, and what you said is true there, especially if you're working in an open plan environment or something like that, where respecting each other's time. There's quite a few companies who do go zones, and during the go zone time, it's not okay to go and interrupt someone or ask them about something or play music or have loud conversations. So there's certainly that element of it, and I think the two major benefits are certainly the productivity. I think that's pretty well proven, but also the liberation, the control of your blood chemistry. And I love doing go zones in the morning. I usually do mine 10:30 to 12:30. Lunch is the reward, and I'm still working in the afternoon, but it feels like I'm cruising a bit, and it just feels like the end of the day. It's like, wow, that's just how easy was that? But I don't feel comfortable doing slow zones unless I've either had a go zone or I've got one scheduled. And that's the other thing. I always schedule these things in advance. I always know when my next go zone's going to be, when my next no zone's going to be. And if I have to move them because of flight changes or something like that, you tend to move it, but you don't lose it. And that's really important, because a lot of people, the thing that they will neglect will be the no zones. They'll do the work part because there's always extra work to do, but when they get busier, they won't do the no zone, the fun zone, the recovery zone. And one of my sayings is stress isn't the problem is lack of recovery. And when people don't have recovery, it's virtually impossible long term to get that sustainable level of peak performance. They can do it for a while with work ethic or just grind it out, but long term that just doesn't work like that. And you'll know from your athlete days you have to have the rest in order to get that level of performance.
Yeah, for sure. And what I like that you said in the recovery zone, the no zone, is to stay away from your phones, because I think a lot of people think that they do relax by looking at their phones, but I do think it's counterintuitive, and you need to give yourself a break. So thanks for raising that. Mark, this is not even a segue, but I really wanted to bring it up before our time sort of lapses. But I loved you've got a website on your website. You've got a video of you entering a stage. It's like 007 style. What kind of other things that are X factors that you bring into I guess leading your workshops or these keynotes? And I do encourage, on a side note, for all of our listeners to hop on there. We'll link to that video in our show notes for this episode, because I thought it was really funny and cool.
That's an interesting point you raised. It's a fine line. So that video you're talking about, that was for a company that I'd already presented to, I think, 6 years in a row. So in one sense you're looking for something different, but also the people remember stories and they remember images. So that was, I was dressed as 007, and the content of that message was 007. So O for organisation, O for optimism, and then 7 daily habits. So the whole idea of that imagery of me in a James Bond mask was meant to remind people, and it created a bit of an entrance. So another time for a sales group, I actually dressed in a crocodile outfit to make the point that in sales you had to have a thick skin. You had to have a thick skin, and people remembered that image. Once as a caveman with a big wooden Y, about finding your strong why, because a caveman had a very obvious why. They just needed to eat and stay warm, so helping people remember that image. But you also have to be careful that you don't go too far, because I have a little bit of a hobby to do illusions, like magic tricks, and I used to do them on stage, so make things disappear and so on. But you have to be really careful that the gimmicks don't take over and the audience would start waiting for the next trick, because I wouldn't introduce it. I'd just do it and something funny would happen. And then you can lose the impact of the actual key message that you're trying to convey. And you have to be clear for the audience, well, what is this? Is it a keynote or is it a magic show? So I actually don't really do that much anymore, because the imagery and the gimmick taken too far actually detracts from the session. And I did have to learn that lesson. But stories and images, as long as they're congruent to the message. So the James Bond 007, the crocodile skin, you've got to have a thick skin, you've got to be strong. The caveman, the strong why, they were congruent to the message, so it works. But if you just do a gimmick without a reason, without a link, then the people won't get it, and it'll detract.
Yeah. So just a question: how did you get these ideas of the caveman and the why? Was that something that you thought of straight away, or were you in the shower one day and thought, "Oh, this is a great costume"? Or like, how did you link those two kind of seemingly disparate things together?
It's really, I suppose you'd just say it's imagination, but I think it's one of the great things. We're talking about the Go Zone before. I've done the Go Zone presentation at least 300 or 400 times, I think, and most of the time it's pretty much the same, and I love doing it. But as a facilitator, it's also great to have these other challenges that get thrown at you. So it's a client you've worked with before, or there's a specific, really strong theme, and to go away and think of something that's going to make that work. And if you can make it a lot of fun for the audience and also fun for yourself, then it's an absolute winner. So I think, that really comes back to the imagination. But for me, it's not so much the idea that comes to you in the shower. It's a time when you do a Go Zone, lock yourself in the door, and you just think to yourself, right, what am I going to do in this session? And it might take you 20, 30 minutes of grinding out ideas until you come up with something. So that's that whole thing it's more about perspiration than inspiration. But I think it's a great thing for facilitators to do, to keep themselves on edge.
Yeah, I agree too. And on that note, finally, what is your advice to a first-time facilitator?
I think a couple of things. Certainly the audience centricity. Certainly do your preparation beforehand. Certainly work on splitting your brain so that you can think about what's coming next, all those things. Certainly get every job you can, speak at a Rotary club, do a meetings, local sporting clubs, even if it means you're not getting paid for those jobs. There's no substitute for being up the front. And also don't be put off if you think it's a crowded field, and how am I going to get work? From a marketing point of view, the absolute best way to get jobs is to do a good job, and it might be hard to break in, but there is always room for a quality facilitator in the industry. And I think personally, I think it's just a fantastic career because it gives you a lot of challenge, the opportunity to travel, meet great people, but it also gives you personal freedom, so you're not working a 9-to-5 job. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I love the ability to be free, almost be a performer in a way, because it all comes down to your level of performance. So for people who've maybe got that aspiration or do a bit but would like to do more, work on your craft. Just work on your craft. Look for every opportunity because it can create and I've been so lucky that it's created just such a fantastic, lifestyle and provided for my family and so on. So don't give up if it's a bit hard, because there are opportunities there more and more.
Oh, I've got to say, Mark, that's probably been one of the most inspiring responses I've heard to that question. So thank you so much. We've covered, just in these 40 minutes, there's so much we've covered and a lot more that we could cover. We've covered everything from your tips in terms of even the detail of getting a new battery for your microphone and the type of microphone that you should use, through to the questions that you ask to clarify with clients, and the research that you do and why that's so important, as well as how to structure your day so you are more productive and can be the best facilitator you can be. So, Mark, thank you so much for all of your insight and wisdom. It's been really great talking to you today.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot, Leanne.
Thanks.